Okay, got everything cut out, and the first thing we're going to do is, this is the back. Stuff on my mat. Anyway, this is the back, and there's the neckline. Here's the piece that we cut out to go around the neckline. So what I'm going to do is, I always mark the center with a black mark slot, one of the big ones, and I just put a little bitty black dot in the center of everything. That way when I iron it, it doesn't come off and it never shows up because it's so far on the edge. I used to use the fix-on pins a lot, and when you iron them they disappear, and so I'd end up sometimes ironing the mark off. So if you've got just a little mark slot, just put a little bitty dot on the center line, and it'll stay on there the whole time where you can see it right there at the edge. And that actually prevents you from having to clip into your seam allowance and stuff, and especially on these knits, sometimes you do that, it stretches too much. So you may want to try that. That's a little suggestion for you. But anyway, I'm going to zoom in closely when I'm sewing, so I'm going to show you here what I'm doing. I'm going to put this on here, and I'm going to come and I'm going to attach it across the shoulder seam down here first. Then I'm going to come down this way and sew it on. But first, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the iron, and I'm going to just fold this under about 1/4 of an inch all the way around my curve here and press it. And then the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and put a stitch in to hold that seam nice and flat, so that when we sew it on, I'll turn it under about like that right there. It's going too much. Anyway, about like that is how much you want to turn it in. And then I'm going to stitch on the bottom side here, so I get close to the edge all the way around. And then when I sew it on, I'll flip it over back onto the neckline, sew it around, and that's what we'll be doing on the machine. So first thing you're going to see is me sewing that seam shut to make sure it stays down. Second thing will be on the neckline. So let's do that next. Okay, the other thing I've done, I've pressed the neckband in half, wrong sides together. There's my little mark right there for the center, so I'll know where that is. Neckband is longer than what I need, so press that in half first, steam it, and then if you've got a clapper, a piece of wood that you press down on it, this is a clapper, and you can go to wawak.com, WAWAK.com, and you can find these there if you don't have one. Anyway, you steam it, press it with this to get all the steam out of it, then flip it over on the other side, alternate your way down it. You kind of want to let the side that has a steam in it dry out before you put it on, and then just leave it on your pressing surface until it completely dries, and it'll stay nice and flat and it won't curl. So that's one of the big problems with these knits. When you cut them, they start curling. But if you do that, steam it real good, use the clapper on it, get rid of all the moisture, and then just leave it. It'll stay nice and flat for you. So I've done that. The other thing we need to do, we're going around this corner. You want to clip just barely into the seam allowance. Just put some little clips to relieve it as it goes around the corner, and I do them about, I don't know, about 1 inch apart as I go around. So I'm just clipping like that into the seam allowance. That way when I start pressing it, it'll have a little bit of relief as I'm gathering that fabric around. You can kind of see where it's trying to overlap right there. So anyway, if you can clip it wherever you need to, but I start out doing them about 1 inch apart, and then as I'm pressing it, if I find it gathering up too much, I can put a couple more relief clips in it. Anyway, I just want to tell you that I've already started pressing it here, and so now I'm going to make my way around it, and then we'll go to the machine. Okay, I've got this pressed under, and I'm going to show you kind of what I did here. as you go around, you have to cut little notches out to get it to lay flat. And as you're pressing it, it'll show where you need to do that. There's a little overlap right there. I'm going to go ahead and trim that off. You don't want any of these little pieces sticking up because it'll show once it's on the shirt. So if you have any like that, just trim them off. Try to keep it as flat as you can. Still have a little bit sticking up. Anyway, you'll see as you start pressing it where the pieces are going to start popping up because there's too much fabric. And you can see how I've done little clips there. Now what I'll do is I'll come and I'll stitch around this evenly right along the edge here, and then I can come back and I can trim some of this off if I need to. Usually I don't have to because this is going to be a little bit thicker. It'll lay, you know, fairly flatly on there. I won't have to worry about it so much, but don't be afraid to come back and trim some of this off after you've stitched if you've got a real thin knit or something. I use this glue. It's the washable clear school glue, and it's about, I don't know, $1.49 for a bottle of it, and I've had this for probably 2 years. And anyway, what I'll do is I'll take this, let me close it off here. I'll take this and just run a quick little bead of glue about that far, get it stuck down. I just put my iron on it without steam, and it holds everything down nicely, especially in this knit. It can be hard to press sometimes. So buy you a bottle of this, and you can see after using it, it doesn't discolor anything. It dries clear and it's pliable. It's not stiffening the fabric up in any major way. It's more or less stabilizing it. That's one area where I got a little bit too much, and you can see just a little bit of a dark area there. But again, it's washable, so once you wash it, you won't even know it's there. Anyway, I use that on a lot of this kind of stuff because unlike tape, you have to mess with it and try to get it in cut down so it's small enough. This thing, you can just run a real small bead around the area, press it down. It works perfectly. No mess, no fuss, and you can't beat the price of it. So buy you some of that and give it a try and see how you like it. Okay, next thing we're going to do, we're going to sit down on the sewing machine and we're going to sew a stitch along this line here where that seam will stay nice and flat, and then we're going to put it on the back side. That will be the step after that, so we'll do that next. Okay, we're at the machine now, and we're going to just sew a stitch close, about 1/4 inch away from the edge here, to lock down this on the back side. So I'm going to sew it from this side so I can keep a consistent distance away from the edge. So here we go. Okay, find scissors. Cut the thread off. Alright, and there is the stitch to hold this little hem back here nice and flat. And okay, got the back of the t-shirt here. And I need to find my neck seam. There it is. And this should match up. So we're going to place it on here like this. We're going to stitch it on. Back tack, and we're done. So there's our neck band. Well, not the neck band, but the protector on the back sewed on. Got a stitch right along the edge there. That second stitch is from us tying down the seam so it won't flop around in any way. It'll be on there good. And then on the back, you're going to see that seam there. So I'll press this next, and then we'll move on and start sewing the rest of it together. So we'll do that next. Okay, we got that sewed on, pressed. I went ahead and did a stitch across here just to anchor this down on the top. And now I'm going to come down and just stabilize the shoulder seam on this side so it doesn't stretch out or anything. So we're just going to come down about 1/4 inch from our seam allowance. And just stabilize this neck seam. And I'm kind of pushing the fabric in a little bit so it doesn't stretch at all. I just want that stitch on there to keep it stabilized so it's not stretching out on me when I'm doing the other things, sewing my seams and stuff. Alright, that takes care of that shoulder. Let's do the other shoulder now. And we're going to repeat this on the front one also. So we're going to stabilize the shoulder seam just the way we're doing here. I'm just showing you the back, but about 1/4 inch, probably a little bit less. And you don't want to stretch it when you're sewing it. Just let it feed it in and keep a little bit in front of it so it will sew it without stretching it. There we go. Okay. See if I can get this and show you the seam. There it is along the edge. And there it is along the edge over here too. So it kind of stabilizes it so it doesn't stretch out when we start sewing it. I'm going to do that on the front next. So I'll fast forward this so you're not so bored with it. Okay, got that taken care of. Our shoulders are stabilized now. And we will move on to the next step. Okay, our next step is to sew our shoulder seams together. So we're going to put wrong sides together, starting out. And we're going to do a stitch that's probably a little bit less than 1/4 inch. So I'm going to do the width of my pressure foot on this machine, and it's less than 1/4 inch. So however you need to do that on your machine, that's what we need to do. So just want to sew the seam together. Make sure I've got everything lined up here. Now I've stabilized these shoulder seams, so now they're not going to stretch so much when I sew them together. And by the way, I'm using a stretch needle. I'm using a size 11 stretch needle. So it's right there. I use stretch instead of ballpoint on these domestic machines because the stretch needle has a little bit bigger eye in it, and it helps form the loop better when this stuff stretches out. there's that arm. So the second side now, I'm going to sew it in the same direction from the armhole back up to the neck. Because you'll notice on your patterns that the neckline doesn't always line up perfectly. It lines up perfectly at the seam, but when you look at the corners, they're always going to be a little bit off because they line up at the seam. Alright, takes care of that. Now we want to encase the seam. So what we do now is turn it wrong side out, flatten our seam out, okay, this is shoulder seam, so I've pressed it flat from the inside, so there's my seam edge right there. And I've done that on both shoulders. I used the clapper to get it nice and flat. And now we're going to come down through here a little bit less than a ½ inch. I want to make sure I encase what I've got in there. And so I'm in between the 1/4 and the ½ inch mark, basically, is what I am on my machine here. So. Okay, there's that one. Now let's sew this one. And I'm going to sew in the same direction from the edge to the shoulder again. Okay, now when we take it and we turn it back around, there's our finished seam on the outside. And we will push the seam towards the front, and then we'll come down through here and do a top stitch to lock it down. So that's what we'll do next. I'm going to go ahead and press it and get it locked down, and then we'll come back and we'll do our top stitch to keep that seam nice and flat. Okay, I've pressed the seam toward the front. There's the inside, the seam edge is right there. That's the front, this is the back. And you can see the seam on the outside back there. So it's going to look nice. Now when you sew this, go ahead and pull the fabric tight. Don't stretch it, just pull it where it's good and tight while you're sewing the seam. And I'm going to sew it from the inside to make sure I stay right there on the edge to lock that seam down. So if I've done the seam straight, which I did, it'll look nice and straight on the outside once I'm done. So here we go. Okay, got that one. Lock this one down next. There we go. Let me turn it over now and show you what it looks like on this side. There's your seam. There's your top stitch to hold it down. Now press it and meld it down into the fabric nicely and it'll look good. So that's what we do now on both of those. We'll get it pressed, and next thing we're going to do is put our neck band on along with our protective band that goes around the back of it. We'll do that on the serger, so I'll get the serger moved over where you can see that, and we'll do that next. Okay, I've got a baste the neck band on now. So here's our neck band, and here's our back of our shirt right here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to leave enough out here so that we can come back and cut it off. This is the center back. We're going to start in a little ways beyond the center back. Center back is there. We're going to start right here and leave enough there so that we can cut it off in the end. But we're going to baste it on, and I've cut the band a little bit wider than what I need, so I'm going to use about a 1/4 inch seam allowance when I'm basting, because that's what I'll do when I serge. Because these aren't ribbing, you can't stretch them as far as you can ribbing, and if you make them a little bit narrower, it lays against your body better. So I mean, you can try to make it bigger if you want to, but just what I've found is that it doesn't work too well. Alright, so I've loosened my tension up. I've gone to a stitch length of 5, and we're going to just baste this on at a 1/4 inch. And we're going to stop right there. Okay, so now we've sewed it in. Zoom out a little bit here so you can see. Okay, now we've sewed this in all the way around. There's our basting stitch. We've left the back of it open so that we can put the right sides together and sew it. Right there will be our mark. So we'll pull it in to there. There's our mark. Leave a 1/2 inch on that side. Pull this one in to the mark. And leave a 1/2 inch on the other side of the mark, and I'll get it where I can stretch it a little bit, so I'll cut it just about a 1/4 inch beyond the mark. That way when I get it in there I can actually pull it and keep it, you know, nice and tight with the rest of it. Okay, I'm going to press this now, and I'm actually going to pull it over my head and make sure that it lays against my body. And so I'm not going to show that part, but you'll know once you pull it over, you know, if it lays properly. Let me pull this back through so you can see what it looks like here. Okay, see how the puckers are in there? Now when I press it, those should go away. So I'll go press it, and I'll press the seams down like that, because that's the way it will be when it's serged, and that's how wide our neck band is going to be right there. Okay, let's do that, and I'll be back and I'll show you the results. Okay, I've pressed it out, and I actually put it on over my head, and it's laying nice and flat against my skin. And this was all puckered up pretty bad before I pressed it. So when you press it out, it actually lays it back out nicely, and you see how the band's laying nice and flat. So now what we need to do is cut these two pieces off at my mark, give myself about a 1/4 of an inch after the mark, and then I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance to close the neckband off. So I'll do the cut, and then when I see you back, we'll sew this on and base the rest of this on, and then after that we'll go to the serger and we'll actually serge it on. So let me do that and I'll see you next. Okay, I've cut the ends off right there at my center back on equal sides, and now the important thing when you sew these two ends together to seal off your neckband, just make sure that when you're putting the right sides together that you take and fold them both the same way in the same direction when you put your right sides together that we're going to sew together. So I've reset my stitch length to a little over 2.5, about 2.7, and tightened my tension back up because I was basting before. So when I did a test stitch on a piece of fabric to make sure the tension was good, and we're all good. So now I'm putting these right sides together. Gonna go out to a 1/2 inch. And if you've gotten as close as I have on this one side, I need to make sure that this stays flat when I sew it together. So I'm going to flip it over. The problem side is this side here. I'm going to flip it over. Make sure this one is flat. And make sure that one is flat, and get it under the foot and get it sewed. Half inch mark. And you notice there I started quite a ways in off the edge of the fabric. That just helps you get the stitch in there and get it locked down before you go back to the edge. Okay, stay on my 1/2 inch mark, and here we go. Okay, I'm going to trim these with pinking shears just along that edge, just barely, and then we're going to press that seam flat, and then we're going to turn it over like this, and we will finish basting it on. Okay, I figured I'd show you what I've done just to give you a visual. The idea is to let this seam lay very flat. I got a thread there, a piece of thread. Anyway, we want this seam to lay flat, so what we did is we pressed it as we sewed it first, like this, and then pressed this flat. Used pinking shears to trim it along the edge, and then I trimmed this way and this way and that way and that way to get rid of the little edges that want to poke out once you've done it. And so now you can see that when we sew it on, we're right there at the center back. There's our dot right there, our seam is right there, and we'll just baste it on. Matter of fact, I don't need to baste it now, I'll just sew it on so you can see. Okay, find my dot, make sure my seam is right there on my dot. Get on my 1/4 inch mark, start where my seam ended, and here we go. Make sure I'm still in the center, and I am. Okay, now our neckband is completely on. This is going to be our back here. If you've got a label, or you can put a piece of ribbon, silk ribbon in there if you want to, when you serge it. That way you know which side's the back. But I generally always know because of this piece we sewed on the back here. You can tell quickly what it is, so I don't like labels in my own clothing, so I don't do that. And I can see that seam's the back, and I see that, and I know it's the back. So anyway, when it's hanging on a hanger, it'll come off like this, and it'll look nice. So okay, now finally we're going to get on the serger, and I'm going to go ahead and press this the way I press the other to get a good seam right here. And we're going to get on the serger, and we're going to serge it on as we hold it like this. So there's the band underneath, and we'll serge it, and I'll cut right where my other stitches are there. So the neckband will be a little bit narrower than what it is showing right now, which I'm fine with. That means it'll lay flat. But I've taken that into account when I created the pattern, that the neckband's not going to be real thick. So, and I've done this experience in using self fabric. As you wash these, eventually, if you don't do this, if you do like a 1-inch band or something like that, it's going to get wavy on you, and that's not what you want. Okay, I've got my serger set up. I got it set on a 3-thread using the wide side needle, so it's a wide 3-thread stitch. And I'm going to start, here's what you got to do. There's the back right there, and you want to roll your neckband over to expose that raw edge right there. And I've got my band here that needs to be sewed on. I'm going to serge it on when I serge this. And when we're finished, this band's going to wrap around that serged edge all the way around and seal on that side, and that will allow it to protect and hide this raw seam here. So we've got a raw seam hidden right now by our French seam on the side, so that's a finished seam, and we don't want this raw edge on our neck is what the goal is here. So as I sew this neckband on permanently, I'm going to take this, put it right side together, line it up over here where the shoulder seam is, right there. And that's where I will start. And I'm going to move this in a little bit. I'm going to trim some of the neckband off, but I don't want to trim any of this off as I sew it. So I'm going to position it kind of like that right there, so that it just catches it, because I don't want to trim too much off. It'll take away from what I can turn around on the seam and get, laid in on the other side. So just want to be careful of that. I guess you could cut it a little bit wider. Maybe smart, cut it wider, sew it on, and then see if you need to trim it any more once you're going to roll it over. But you'll see how I attach it after we do this. Okay, right there where the neckband is, right there on the shoulder seam. This is the only time I miss my industrial serger. Raise the foot a lot higher on it. Start getting all this under the foot. It gets a little bit crowded under there. Even when you can raise it up a little bit more. Okay, here we go. Okay, that's far enough. Now I'm going to raise the foot. And sew off. Now to lock that stitch down right there, I'm going to go over this with my sewing machine a couple of times. Looks like I didn't get far enough to seal that off. Let me go ahead and do that. Go ahead and trim it. I kind of missed going far enough up. It cut a little bit more than what I wanted to. I'm going to go ahead and disengage the knife to prevent that from happening again. Alright, fix my little boo-boo here. Lock that needle down. Okay, there we go. That'll fix it. Rotate the fabric around, put the foot back down, and sew off of it. Okay, I'm going to leave those little tails there. That'll show me where I need to go over it with a straight stitch just to lock those edges back down again. So I'm going to come around here and just go with a straight stitch right there and right there, and then I can trim those extras off and I won't ever have to worry about it coming out in the laundry. Okay, there's our back, and we're going to take this now and bring it around, wrap it around that seam right there, and then we will sew it down. Okay guys, I had to make a little change here. This is thicker fabric than what my normal pattern was for my thinner knits, and this little piece that I serged on, it wasn't quite long enough to go around to make the seam. So what I decided to do, because of the bulk of this, and you've got 2 layers of this, because what we do, we take this and we fold it in half so that we have this clean edge right here when we flip it around. So we're going to sew it on without the serge stitches, and I've tied my serge stitches off here and here, so this will be in between. And it reduces the bulk, and I really don't need that to be serged because it's going to be covered by this once it flips around. That seam's going to be completely encased, so I don't have to worry about it being serged, and the knits don't ravel either. So anyway, I'm going to sew this on again, just using my straight stitch here, going from this edge to this edge. And anyway, I'm just going to come down through here to 1/4 of an inch and sew it on, and then I'll flip it over. And I'm not going to show me sewing that on. I'm going to have to press it and stuff and get it ready to flip it around, and then I'll start showing you there how we're going to attach it back onto the shirt. So we'll do that next. Okay, I'm over at my pressing station, and I wanted to show you what we're doing here. This is a ham right here, and I'll put a link. Look up Stitch Nerd on just Google Stitch Nerd if you want to get one of these, and she'll make you a custom one. So there it is. Anyway, so that's called a ham, and what I do is I turn the shirt wrong side out so the right side is facing down on the ham, and that allows me to get my neckband on here where I can press it. Now this is the piece that I sewed on. So we sewed it like this, right sides, or I should say right sides, on the right side of the fabric. I sewed that on at 1/4 of an inch, and now I'm pressing it over the way it's going to lay once I come in here and I stitch it on. But at the same time, this allows me to go ahead and press my neckband here. So this is a gravity feed iron. You can get these for about $100. And they've got a water tank that you fill up manually. It's not like my commercial one that steams. This one steams actually when it gets to the iron itself. But anyway, I've had people ask me before what iron I'm using, and this is just a gravity feed. I'll put a link in here, an Amazon link on the video as to where you can find one of these on Amazon. And I'm just shooting it with steam, going around it. And this is a wood clapper. This absorbs the moisture that I've put on there by steaming it, and it sets the seams very nicely. It makes a huge difference. So you find one of these. I'll put a link if I can find one on Amazon for you. And you can also go to Wallwack and get these also. Okay, now that I've done that, I just let it set until it completely cools down, and that will set my neckband and everything where it looks really nice. One of the things I'm going to do when I sew this on, I'm going to sew it from the inside here. So you want to make sure your tension looks good on the bottom side when you do that, because that's what's going to show. Anyway, I'm going to come down here, come all the way across the edge and up on this side. So that's what will hold it down. So you're going to see those stitches on the outside. You'll notice them on your shirts. You can make this smaller where you just stitch in the ditch along here on the front side to tie it down, and I've done that a few times, but I just decided to go ahead and put a little bit bigger one on here on the video so you could see it. But you see where that seam is right there. If you want to cut one of these much smaller, you can take it on there and then come around here and stitch in the ditch, and it will just catch it as it goes around the neckband. But anyway, made this one a little bit bigger. The shirt's thicker and stuff, so it's no big deal. You can make them bigger like this if you want to. This one was cut at 3 1/4 inches, and then it's folded wrong sides together. You see the fold there. Anyway, it's folded wrong sides together when we put it on. So anyway, that gives you a good clean finish out here where it's folded. Okay, I'm going to let it dry, and then I'll meet you over at the sewing machine. Okay, I brought it over here to the machine, and we're going to sew this little piece down. So we're going to start up here on the neck at the edge, and we're going to edge stitch all along this. It's going to be very narrow. It's going to be very close to the edge, let me put it that way. So basically what I do is I butt the edge of the fabric up to the right side of my foot, and that gives me a very small seam allowance there. So Okay, get this around where you can see it here. There's what it looks like on the back side. So I'll go press this, but it looks nice and uniform back there. And then on the inside, bring it back around here where you can see the inside of it. There's what we have on the inside. So I'll go press this nicely, and probably going to re-press the collar while I'm over there, just like I did on the previous video when I showed it to you, and then we'll move forward. The next thing we're going to do is put the sleeves on, and we'll serge them on in the flat, so it'll be fairly easy. We're pretty much down to the easier parts now because it's that. And I'll look at it, and if I need to put a band on it, I'll make that decision once I've got the sleeves completely enclosed and stuff, and otherwise I'll just turn it up and do a cover stitch hem on it for the hem line. So anyway, let me get this pressed and we'll go forward to putting our sleeves on next. I'm getting a little bit ahead of something that I need to show you. We need to go ahead and do a stitch around the neck from the side seam to the front to keep that seam right there down, that serge seam. So we're going to do a stitch that's just a little bit beyond the seam line here. Get this around here where I can get started and show you. My stitch length is still set at 3. Okay, I'm going to start right on the shoulder seam. Go ahead and drop my needle down in there where I need to start. And it's going to be about the width of this presser foot, which is just barely under 1/4 of an inch, because my 1/4 of an inch mark sets about right here, so it's a fairly narrow foot. So here we go. Machines, the bed's flat, and I can go much faster, plus when I'm not talking, trying to teach, so this seems kind of slow. All right. See if we got any threads hanging out here. Got a couple on the inside. Okay, you can see our stitch there across the front. That'll hold that seam down nicely. And I'll go press it. Then we'll put the sleeve on. Okay, we're going to sew this on. We're going to baste it on first. Actually, I'm just going to use a regular stitch instead of a baste. But the reason for doing this, normally I do this on an industrial serger, and it's got a foot lift and it's got a long table on it. And so what I do normally is on the serger is I just anchor those two down and then off I go, and I can sew it up in about probably 10 seconds because the thing flies. But I'm going to suggest you do this on your home machine. Go ahead and baste before you serge, or if you're not serging, you're actually sewing it on. So sew with your normal seam allowance, whatever that is. And I want to make sure I'm all the way to the end there. Sure those match up. Just like that. There we go. Okay. Got my stitch locked in. I'm just going to go, I've marked the center of my sleeve, and then I've marked the center of my arm's eye hole in my shirt. So it's always located a little bit off from the side seam. Don't assume the side seam is your center mark. So match the arm's eye up, and then walk it around, and you'll see exactly where the middle is. Okay, there are my two spots for my middle point. Now I'm going to go ahead and lay this down, line it up, flatten it out. Easier said than done. Okay, make sure my center mark is still lined up. And it is. Getting a little bit off right there. There we go. Line back up. You got a lot of bias going on here, so try not to stretch anything out as you're doing this. My center mark and my center mark right there. Just about to my center mark. Okay, made it to my center mark. Now I'm going to readjust, get everything laid out, match the end. Match the end up. That bottom seam will want to walk towards the inside, so just keep checking it. And if I were you, I would baste this on, longest stitch on your machine, and then loosen the tension. That way, if you mess up, it's easy to get the seam out. Okay. Try to go nice and slow to keep everything lined up, and that's probably what you're going to have to do on your home machine. I'm going to do the other sleeve, and then we're going to go to the serger. I'll tell you what, we'll go ahead and go straight to it. I'll go ahead and serge this, and then I'll baste the other side so I can get over to it. Okay, got a serger set up. I went to a 4-thread overlock since the sleeves and stuff needs a little bit more support. So we've got it basted now, so it's just a matter of just got to feed it through the serger now, and we should be able to go fairly fast since everything's now laid down tight. Alright, here we go. I'm trimming just a little bit off the side. Checking underneath, make sure everything's flat. Just about at the end, make sure everything is nice and flat. Here we go. Okay, and again I'll go with a straight stitch machine and go back and forwards on the end here before I completely cut the threads off. So that'll lock it down. Alright. Now, all I'm going to do is go press the seam to lock the stitches in, and then it's going to be a matter of sewing from the side seam all the way back through. So anyway, we'll put right sides together and we'll sew the seams like this. When it comes to your seams matching here, you want them going in opposite directions, so pay attention to which way. We want this one going to the back. I'm sorry, we want it going up towards the shoulder, and then the other seam will go in the opposite direction of whatever that is. So you're going to line your seam up where your stitch is when you sew it, so you may want to pin that together so those seams line up perfectly when they go under the serger. And you can also baste this. Probably what I suggest you do is go ahead and put this on your sewing machine and baste this part right here where that seam is. Just go over that just to hold it in place, and then you won't have to worry about if they match or not once you get it under your serger. Okay, that's it for now. I'm going to press this and then we're going to sew up the side seams. Okay, I decided to go ahead and baste up the side seams. So we're going to start from the bottom hem, and we're going to go all the way up over the shoulder and all the way down to the sleeve. And I'm still using a 4-thread overlock. side. Start at the bottom on this next side. And you see why you baste it. You can really serge it very fast without having to worry about everything lining up. Now we've got a real shirt. So we're going to press the side seams and then we're going to put the cuffs on next. We'll do that with the serger. So let me get the seams pressed and ready to go, and then we'll decide after I try it on if I'm going to put a band on it or not, and we'll go from there. Thanks. Okay, we've got our neck band, our wristbands here. And we're going to sew it together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Let me see how this fits. Yeah, we're going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You can use a smaller seam allowance if you need to. And also, some people serge this. I don't like the bulk, so that's why I'm going to use the sewing machine to sew it together. And these are cut with a cave in the middle of them. That way when I fold it back, it'll match the seam nicely. So just kind of follow along on the seam allowance. Okay, there's that one. Okay, I've got those together. I'm going to trim these with pinking shears just like I did the others, each one of them, and then I'm going to iron. Get these out of the way. Okay, so pink these, don't cut any additional off. You got a little bit of room to cut a little bit off, and then we're going to take this, fold it together to make our cuff. Anyway, so our cuff will be about that big, and it's going to be smaller than the sleeve. That way it'll shrink around your wrist and keep the sleeve from going over your hand. So we've got a little bit of room in the sleeve, so we need to do a cuff to get it to tie in. Okay, I'll do that, and then I'll beat you on the serger next, and we'll serge these onto the sleeves. Okay, it's time to serge the sleeve on. So I'm going to match this seam with the inner seam, and then I've got a dot on the sleeve and a dot on the band showing where the middle is. So I'm going to match those up. And by the way, this is the sleeve, this is the cuff, this is the raw edge of the cuff, so we're going to sew raw edges together when we do this. And I'm going to start sewing basically on the seam. So now I'm just stretching it as I sew it. Here we go. Trimming just a little bit off to even the seams up nicely. Find my dot again, make sure I'm lined up. Still good. Sleeves are small down here. It's a tight fit. Okay, we're coming down the home stretch now. Okay, at the end, I'm going to raise the foot, turn that around, and sew it. And there's our band. So side seams line up. Everything looks good. So we're going to do that on the other sleeve. And then I'm going to try it on and see if I need a waistband or not. If not, I'll just do the cover hem on the bottom of it. So I'll show you what we're going to do with that next. Okay, the shirt is long enough to do a cover hem on the bottom of it. This is a Juki MCS 1500 cover stitch machine. So I'm going to do the wide hem, so 2 outside needles. Here we go. I'll keep it folded under. Everything looks good, tension's good, so we're good to go. Coming up on my starting point. Okay, there it is. Cover hem's done. Everything looks good. No skip stitches. Right on the edge. Just the way it should be. Okay guys, that concludes the sew along. We've got everything looks good. So I'll go ahead and shoot a shot of it, picture to put here at the end of it so you can see it. And let me know if you guys have any questions at all, and I'll be happy to answer. And if I need to, I'll do a video answer to answer any questions. That's it for now. Take care. Okay, I figured I'd just shoot a video and go through it with you instead of a still picture. Alright, let's see. Here's what we did. We did French seams in the shoulder. See how nice and clean that looks on the inside. And then we did the cover for the neck back here. And then we've got this little thing on the back of it for stabilizing that area. And I've got long sleeves. I put bands on the end of it to make them wrap around my wrist like this sweatshirt does. Long sleeves obviously, and then we did a cover hem for the hem on it, cover stitch. And you can use your sewing machine to do a zigzag. If you use a stretch stitch, just be aware that those are just about impossible to remove if you make a mistake. So just consider that before you actually use a stretch stitch. Anyway, and you can also use a zigzag if you want to. If you're going to do that, try to use some contrasting thread or something, and make it a statement, a fashion statement. But anyway, this is it. This one is still a little bit too big for me, and so I've got a whole roll of this, so I'm going to end up making me a little bit smaller one. And this one, I guess if I want to wear something under it, it'll work, but I tried reducing my pattern by a couple of inches and it's still too big, so it just shows how much weight I've lost over the last 6 months. Anyway, so that's it guys. If you have any questions, let me know. And I'm recording this a couple of days before Thanksgiving. Have a great Thanksgiving with your family and be safe, and have a good Christmas holiday this year. That's it. Take care.